Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Scraps to Soil event with the Canadian Wildlife Federation. My name is Rebecca Moon. I'm with the Center for Global Education, and I'm very happy to moderate this event for you because we are going to learn a ton about soil and composting and how to keep healthy soil. So I'm very excited about what we're going to be working on today. So welcome to everybody that's here. I'm sure we'll still have a couple schools joining in, but if you're a couple minutes late, that's okay. Just a couple reminders before we get started. If you have a question, the best way to get your question answered is to type it into the chat, just like we did during our trivia. So if you have a burning question during our event that you would love our expert to answer, just go ahead and type it into the chat and we will get to it as soon as we can. Another great way to get your questions answered is to use your little raise hand reaction. So if you see at the bottom of your screen something called reactions, you can click on that and it will raise your hand and I can clearly see who has questions, and then you can even unmute and ask them live and then we can see them. Okay, so what I would like to begin with is a land acknowledgement. So I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Amiskwaciwa. So this is what we colonially call Edmonton, and it's on Treaty 6 territory. This land is a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to many groups, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. I would like to also acknowledge all of the traditional territories and lands that we are all on today. Since we're meeting virtually, it's a really great opportunity to connect to the land that we each call home. Having a respect for the land that gives you food and shelter in life is a really important step in the reconciliation process with Indigenous groups around the world. And we're very lucky today to be able to look deeper into our connection with the land and explore how we can help give back to the earth in a really meaningful way. So I invite you during the event today to really try to keep this in the front of your mind and think about your connection to the land and the soil where you are today. I would like to present a couple things to you before I hand it over to our guest speaker. So first off, I would like to welcome all of our schools that are here. Normally, I love to go through and welcome each of you guys by name, but you guys can probably see there are a lot of you. It is a very popular event today, so thank you very much to everybody that signed up. That's awesome. So I'll just take a minute quickly to share a few of the schools that are joining us. We've got a lot of home schools across Canada and a lot of Canadian schools from coast to coast to coast. So we have representation from British Columbia, across the prairies, all the way to the Maritimes. So it's awesome to see so many great Canadian schools. We have Keystone Elementary joining us from the United States, ESE in Portugal, RDPS is joining us from India, St. Joseph's from the Philippines is joining us today, and Queen's Royal College from Trinidad. So a few of our international schools that are also able to be with us today. So if I didn't get your name up on our slide, I'm really sorry. If you're joining us from YouTube and I can't see you, welcome. I'm sorry if I missed your name, but thank you so much for joining us. Quick little agenda of what you guys can expect for today. We do have our guest speaker that's going to be teaching you all about composting, but we did save a little bit of time at the end for some questions. So if you do have some really good questions that you or your students come up with today during the event, and you want to save them for the end of the discussion period, we will welcome you guys to type them in the chat or come up to your screen and ask them, and we'll do our best to answer them as well as we can. So we will save a little bit of time at the end, hopefully. And one last thing before we get started, I have a little activity for you guys. So if you are willing to participate, you might get a chance to share your activity on screen. All that you need is a piece of paper and something to write with. So today we're going to be learning all about how things break down in the soil and how that helps with healthy plants. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to make a life cycle of your favorite fruit or vegetable. So all you need is a piece of paper and something to draw with. You're going to add your favorite fruit or vegetable right into the center of your paper. And as we work through all of our presentation today, you can add all sorts of things to your paper. So we'll see kind of what sorts of things go in and out of that life cycle to help it go from a fruit to the ground to a new plant. So if you would like to participate in this activity, go ahead and grab some writing utensils and we will hopefully get to see some of them at the end of our presentation today. Okay, without further ado, I would love to welcome our guest speaker. Sarah Colbert is a naturalist and gardener since she was a little girl, when she would delight in the plants and animals in her backyard. Sarah's love for nature led to several environmental jobs and naturalist volunteer roles before joining the CWF, where she helps Canadians discover the incredible nature right outside your doors and garden in a wildlife-friendly way. So welcome, Sarah. I will go ahead and stop sharing, and I will hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, I will then share my screen. Can you all see my screen okay? Perfect, okay. And just move something over for me. And I want to say thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure to share with you guys some things that I know about composting. And before I even get into the presentation, I just want to sort of say something akin to what Rebecca mentioned, and that, you know, the earth is really important. We really need it, and it's a beautiful place to enjoy. And we all have so much power and the ability to do lots of really good on this planet. And this, what we're going to talk about today, is a great way to do something really important, really positive, and it's actually quite simple. So let's get going and see what we can do here. So have you guys ever wondered actually about, when you think of the planet and how long it's been around, do you ever wonder why we don't have huge piles of fallen trees and leaves and other organic material lying around from all these millions of years? When you think of all the plants and all the animals that have ever been and have lived and died, where do they go? Do you guys have any idea?
Okay, and I did launch, if you guys will see in your settings, a poll for these questions. So if you'd like to answer on the poll, that will work awesome. If you want to type it in the chat, you can do that as well. But there should be a question of, where do you think these leaves go? They don't build up forever.
So I guess we'll give that a few moments for people to answer that, eh? Okay.
And I should just check, we can see the poll, right? I did launch it. I want to make sure our schools are able to see them.
I did see it, and I definitely saw it, and then I closed it.
Okay, so we'll see. Maybe we can keep going, and I'll kind of let you guys know what the results are from that guy.
Okay, so, well, the next slide actually does have the answer to that, but it goes back to the earth, and that's thanks to composting, which is why we're here today. So composting is nature's way of recycling organic matter, which are things that were once living, into a nutrient-rich soil-like product. And when I say nutrients, that's good stuff. Like, we take nutrients from our food, like all the proteins and vitamins and minerals and such, and it goes into a soil-like product. And how does that happen? Well, very small animals, they eat our food scraps and our yard waste, and then they excrete these particles, which is kind of like pooping, but you know, they're small enough for other plants to use as nutrients. And that's nature's way of fertilizing a plant. And so fertilizer is like when we get the vitamins and minerals from our food, or even if you have to take a supplement like vitamin C. And so here's my next question for you. What plant part brings in these nutrients from the soil? And there's a kind of a clue on the screen to help you in case you need a hand with that one.
Our schools are very good at plants. We already have a unanimous answer on our polls here, but I'll give you guys a few more seconds to see if you can get your guesses in. Oh yeah, we've got everyone. Everybody says that they think it is the roots.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, great. So then moving right along, we'll just talk about now which are the organisms, or some of them, that are responsible for composting. So a lot of them are microorganisms. And when you think of microorganisms, they're micro, they're small. You need a microscope to see them. So that can include creatures like nematodes and bacteria and fungi. And they work away, eating away our scraps, and they make the pile hot enough it can even kill wheat seeds and harmful organisms. And then there are some bigger creatures like worms and springtails and millipedes that are normal to have in a compost pile. They help eat our scraps too, and then on and on and on. In fact, here's a picture of a soil food web I was able to find, and it shows, if you look below the tree where the grass kind of is, there's a clump that says organic matter, and it shows that below that there's fungi and bacteria, some of these microorganisms that eat that, and other organisms that eat them, and on and on. And it just shows, like Rebecca was saying earlier, in a pinch of soil, I'm going to say like a square foot of soil, you should have that teeming with life. Millions and millions of creatures in that plot of soil. And a lot of them you can't see, but they're still there, and they're still so important. So how we treat the earth is really important, because a lot of our soil actually is considered depleted. We've used synthetic or chemical fertilizers instead of natural ones like compost. We spray with other chemicals, and that has killed off a lot of organisms. So composting is a wonderful way to support these creatures. But who can compost? Well, the good news is everybody can, whether you're at your home or at a school or at a business, even a restaurant. And I put an asterisk next to that to remind me, I've got a very cool story I'm going to tell you about a restaurant owner that I knew who had an incredible way with his garbage. So that's coming up soon. But first of all, the benefits of composting. So when you compost, you're helping keep so much out of our landfills. And that is good for two reasons. Number one, the landfill will last longer, because if you think of all the stuff we throw out and how much food is in there, piling up, because there's so many of us throwing so much stuff all the time. But the sooner that fills up, oh my gosh, then we have to find another one to replace that one. And that means you have to go to a natural area and cut down all those trees or fill out that beautiful natural space with a space for our garbage. So that's not very good. And then also it's very expensive. So people like your parents who pay tax dollars, it costs a lot of money to build a new landfill. So the longer we can make it last, the better. That's how one-way composting helps. Another way is that a lot of our organic materials that can be composted, when they mix with other materials in the landfill, it creates a toxic, which is a dangerous liquid called leachate. And that costs, again, a lot of money to catch and treat and make it safe. So there's a lot of problems if we do send our organic material to the landfill. But another reason, of course, is that it makes this beautiful product, which people call gardener's gold. It's wonderful stuff. So we have this free soil amendment we can actually be creating instead of throwing out and making problems with our landfill. So that's the benefits of composting. But now what about compost itself? Well, compost has so many nutrients in it, and it feeds, which means fertilizes our plants the natural way, which means gently, in a way that the plants can handle. So the plants are healthier. So they're healthier, which means they can repel insects better, they can cope with weather better, they look stronger and more vibrant. And that means if we eat them, maybe it's a tomato plant, maybe it's a herb, it means we're getting the nutrients that we need as well. It helps us be healthy. So it completes the cycle. And it also improves the structure of the soil. So if you've got a garden and it's really sandy, water goes through very quickly, it doesn't hold it, it's harder for the plant to have the moisture. Well, it can help bind that soil, this sandy soil, so it holds the water more easily. And if you've got heavy, the opposite, like heavy hard pan clay, which doesn't let the water and air in very much, it helps to loosen it up so the water and air can go through, which helps the plants. And as I said before, it's safe for the microorganisms, so that's really, really good. And if composting is so important, then let's get right to it. How do we do this? So I'm not sure if you've been adding any of these items to your picture that you're drawing in terms of your favorite plant and its different cycle, but there's some more pictures coming up that you might want to use as inspiration. So composting with and without air are the two main ways. Aerobic is with air. If you think of someone that says they're doing aerobic exercising, they're getting a lot of oxygen. So aerobic composting has air. So the organisms that are helping to compost, they need air. The pile heats up, it composts faster. There's no bad smells. Really, it should not smell bad, your composter. If it does, then it means there's a bit of a problem. We can talk about that in a minute. The other kind is anaerobic, so there's no air. Perhaps it's all being done underground. Some composters are designed to do that, where there's a little cap just above ground and you can put your stuff in there and you close the cap and it's all sealed. Or perhaps your regular composter got so wet and so compacted that air can't get in, and then the aerobic organisms die off and the anaerobic ones take over, and that can be very smelly and it can be much slower too. But really, if we talk about aerobic composting, which is what most people do, it is quite simple. And there's three ways people can do it. There's a basic one in the yard where you have organic materials in a pile or in a composter and you can leave it be, or you can turn it once in a while if you want to speed it up. The other kind is vermicomposting, which is using worms in a bin. And you can keep it in your house so the temperatures are even and the worms don't die from the cold or the excessive heat. Or if you have it outside, you can line it with a special kind of insulation. Or there's city composting. We're just going to talk about the first two because not everybody's on a city composting system. And if you are, they've got their own particular details around that. So For basic composting, you want to think about where you're going to put it, the location, and the style. What kind of composter is it going to be? So if it's in a sunny spot, it'll dry out faster. You might need to add some moisture. If it's in a shady spot, it might not dry out as fast. Keep it close enough that if you do have to add water, it's not very hard to get a hose or a watering can to it. Generally, you don't need to add. I never have had to in my time, but if you need to, at least it's an option. And you want it close enough that you can walk to it with your scraps. And if you do it over the winter, maybe you've got 2 composters and you've got one that you fill up during the winter, because these organisms go dormant in the winter. So your stuff's going to pile up. Whereas normally when you compost, it never really piles up much because the organisms are constantly eating and they're constantly getting that matter down. You want space around it so you can stir it or harvest the compost. And then what you make it out of, it can be wooden pallets, which are materials. They're things that people use for transporting all kinds of boxes and whatnot to stores. It can be plastic, like a composter you buy in the store. You can just have an open pile. You can use chicken wire. There's lots of options for composting. Now, the ingredients you need are moisture and air, and then, of course, the actual materials that we're going to put in there. So there's dry or brown materials. They've got carbon to give the organisms energy. So they're typically dry and brown materials. They're dried leaves, they're old twigs, perhaps sawdust and wood chips if someone does woodworking. And then they also need wet or green materials. They're not always green, but grass clippings are, fresh leaves are, but they're also other colors like orange peels and red from tomato scraps and yellow from banana peels. So all those fresh materials give these organisms nitrogen that they need to grow and reproduce. Now, vermicomposting, again, you want to talk about where to put it and how to do it. You want to have it typically indoors so the temperature doesn't, get too problematic for these little creatures. And you can use a styrofoam bin, plastic bin. You can use wood, although I'm told to be careful with wood because some wood gives off something that can be harmful to the worms. Some people have done it, but I'm not sure too much about it. So just check into that if you want to make your own. They should have holes so they can breathe, get some air in there. You want a lid. And there's different kinds. When I had one years ago, it looked like a blue box, but it didn't have holes at the bottom. And it had a lid at the top with holes so they could get the air. And there's another kind here I'm showing, which is a common kind people can buy nowadays. And it's got different layers that you use with the worms on one layer in the soil. And then you keep putting material in that layer. And then when they have had enough, then they start feeding from another layer, which you fill with your food scraps. And then when the worms are busy in that other layer, you can take out then the one that they finished with and harvest that. So here I wanted to remember to tell you the sick plant story and a restaurant story. So the restaurant was called the Cajun Attic. And this is back when I worked for the city of Ottawa. And we helped businesses reduce their waste. And these guys, the only thing they put to the curb were cigarettes and straws because they were incredible. They took all of their food waste and they ground it up and they fed it to their worms. They had a worm bin outside. In fact, they had several worm bins all lined up and they were outside. So he lined them with special styrofoam to keep them warm enough in the winter. And because he was able to divert so much of his waste or his garbage that way, he was able to come on the city program for recycling. So he recycled everything else. The only garbage he had left were cigarette butts and straws, which is pretty impressive, I think. So it just shows what's possible when you put your mind to it. And then the other story is a sick plant story. I knew this lady who actually was fantastic with worm bins, and all her friends would give her their sick plants. And what she would do is she'd take a little bit of the compost from the worm bin, the worm castings, she'd add it to the plant's soil, and the plant always got better, never failed. So just showed how important the vermicompost was. It was very good for the soil, for the plants in general, but also helped make them really healthy. So in a worm bin, you're going to have the worms. Again, I'm not sure if you're drawing a picture, but you might find some of these pictures inspiring for yours. We only use red wiggler worms. Now, they're not native to Canada, so if you get tired of the bin, please don't release them to the wild. I'm told they won't survive in most of our climates, but there are some parts of the country that are warmer and it's best not to introduce non-native species to our natural habitats. Not a good idea. Now, they are usually the ones used because they live at the soil surface. They don't bury deep, 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 which means as you're giving them the food scraps, they don't have to have a ginormously deep bin to do it, and they can live in a shallow surface area. Again, you're going to do the same thing with a regular composter. You're going to give them your food scraps, except, and I said, I had this on the other slide, but I didn't remember to say it out loud. You generally want to avoid things like meat and dairy that are coming from animals, and smelly things like onions and garlic, fats and sauces. In this case, they can be very hard on the worms. In the other composter situation, it can actually attract predators and pests like raccoons and whatnot to come and actually eat out of your composter, which is not a fun thing because they can chew through it and make messes and whatnot. So best to keep things simple, stick to your bed.
Sarah, sorry for your poll question for that one. They actually did pretty good on it. It was one of the harder ones, but 75% of us knew that those things would attract pests to the compost bin. So,
I'm sorry, the bar here is covering that. I forgot that question was there. Yeah. I couldn't even read it.
Yeah, no, but they did pretty good. It was a tricky one, but most of them got it. So good job,
I'm
guys.
glad you saw it, and I'm glad you're able to answer it. So that's awesome. Thank you for pointing that out. That's great. It's always tricky when you're creating a presentation. There's some part of the slide that is not going to be visible to someone, unfortunately. Yeah, so then moving on, carbon again, we talked about before with regular composters. In this case, you can use shredded newspaper. You want to make sure it's something that's not bleached, because some of our paper actually goes through a process where they bleach them, and that just to make it bright white, which we really don't need, and it's really not good for worms. So you don't want bleached paper. You don't want glossy paper because that's been treated with chemicals too. And avoid colors. If you're going to put newsprint in, avoid ones with the colors. The blacks are pretty safe now. They're using vegetable-based ink, so they shouldn't be harmful. You can use dried leaves from the garden. You can use shredded cardboard. And this is the outer part of a coconut, which actually people can use, not as easily bought, of course. But if you make a mixture of that and you add a bit of soil, then you're ready to go. So you'd want to basically chop up your scraps and you bury it in the bin. And there's different ways of doing it. You saw that there was one bin that had all the different layers. You can just simply move it a circular clockwise motion in those. This bin here I got a picture of, they just basically have it on one half and there's a bit of a blanket that they'll fold over and then they'll do the other half. When I had my worm bin, I would bury it in one corner of the worm bin, and a few days later I'd bury it in another corner and I'd go around and around, so the worms had an easy path to follow. And by the time I got back to the first part, they'd already eaten it, so then we could keep going. Now you got to watch the bin doesn't get too wet or too dry, depending on what you're putting in it. If it gets too wet or too dry, it's uncomfortable for them, so you can adjust accordingly. And after 2 or 3 months, you find that, oh my gosh, it's different now. It's not soil and bedding anymore. It's actually something different. It's like the soil-like product, which is the worm castings. And the worms don't want to live in there for long. They want their food. They want their fresh bedding. So that's when it's time to harvest. Now, I showed you that one with the multi-layers. That's kind of a neat one because the worms naturally go up to the next layer if you entice them with food. In the olden days, had this bin, and so it was just one bin where the worms were, and I had to harvest them, separate them from the worm castings. So basically, I had to go outside on a sunny day, plop them down on a table. They didn't like sunlight, so they'd go right to the bottom, which meant I could take the castings from the top and then keep doing it and keep doing it. And then eventually I had my clump of worms, which I try to get out of the sun really fast, and then I start again. There's different ways of doing this, and there's easier ways nowadays. So if you're going to explore this for your classroom, check things out and see what you can find near you. But then I've got to wrap this up soon, but just talk about how we can use compost. You can add it to your garden, to the soil there. You can add it to a plant pot. You can use it as a mulch, which means it's a layer that you put around plants on top of the soil, and that's sort of a protective layer. It helps the roots to have an even temperature. It helps them conserve moisture and can sometimes keep weeds down. And there's something else you can do. You can make compost tea. Bet you've never heard of that before. You can actually soak some compost in a bucket of water, and then you strain it off after a day or so, and then you've got a very rich liquid which you can water into your plants. I've done that too. A little messy, but it can be done easily enough. So different ways to play with compost. And then wrapping things up, there are some resources on our website that do talk about this. And there's also activities on our Hinterland Who's Who site, which has something called the Wild Gang. There's different activities there you might be interested in. And iNaturalist, I don't know if you've heard of that, but if you like taking pictures, this is a great place where you can take pictures and you can share them, not just with people around the world who are curious to know what's going in your community, but also scientists check out this website, and it helps them discover if there's something new in your part of the world that's never been there before. And then I've also got a book. This is probably more for the teachers and the parents watching, but this is a book on composting from two Canadians who've written it. And I have great respect for both of them, Lorraine Johnson and Mark Cullen. So if you want to check that out, it's a great resource. And then, yeah, so if you have time to show pictures, that would be awesome to see what people have been drawing. If you've got questions about anything I've said today, I'd be happy to see if I can help.
Awesome. Sorry, Sarah, just really quickly, could you tell us the name of the book that you were sharing?
Yes.
Just in case we couldn't quite see it.
For sure. It's called The Real Dirt by Mark Cullen and Lorraine Johnson. I'll get even closer. You can see that. It was written a while ago, but it's still a very good, helpful book if you want to know the ins and outs of composting. And there's probably others out there. I just haven't been keeping an eye out myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much. So yeah, now is a great chance, you guys, if anybody has a question about any of the organisms or microorganisms that Sarah talked about, or questions about starting a compost, or if anybody out there has a compost and has a compost story they'd like to share with us, now's your chance. So you can either raise your little hand icon and we can let you unmute and ask on camera, or if you have a question that you want to type in the chat, we can take them in the chat as well. Also, Sarah, if I could get you to stop sharing your screen, I'll go ahead and pop mine back up as a little reminder here.
Yeah, and I'll add one more point to us before I go any farther. I said I was going to talk a little bit about, because some people have concerns about compost piles smelling. So I should just, while you're thinking of questions, just say, if it's done correctly, it shouldn't smell. And correctly can be very easy, because I've been composting for years, all different kinds of composters. It's pretty laid back, it's pretty relaxed, so long as you have a similar proportion of the dries materials to the wet materials, you should be fine. And if you ever want, when you put the wet layer down, you can have a little bit of soil nearby, or you can have some dried leaves you've saved just to cover on top if you want. But typically it should not be smelling. If it gets too wet, it might. If you have too many of the green nitrogen rich materials, it might. But other than that, you should be good.
Yeah, I've heard that one of the biggest tips is, as long as you keep mixing it and keep it stirring, that can like stop it from
getting... Well, that can help too. I've done it where I haven't even done that. It takes longer. It can take, several months to do, but if you want it faster, turn it. And that certainly does help, because it gets air in it, which helps the organisms and does not make a smell.
Right. Yeah, totally. So we do already have a couple good questions coming in. So I'm just going to pop this up here just as a reminder before I get to those questions. But if you guys are working on your little worksheet, there was lots of good things that you can add. You can throw a compost bin on there. We talked about some worms and other microorganisms. You can maybe show your fruit or vegetable turning into a new plant. So you guys can go ahead and keep adding as we go over these questions. So our first question, Sarah, is from Nicole and Mark in Edmonton. Do worms drink water? I'm picturing teeny tiny little worm water glasses. Do worms drink water like animals, like the rest of animals do?
Yeah, what a neat question. I've never thought of that before. I would say no. I think they get their moisture from the food that they're eating, to my knowledge. I've only ever given them the food which has the moisture in it, because when you think about apple cores and banana peelings, if you let them sit, they do have a moisture content to them. So that mixed with the soil is what the worms like to eat. And they like the soil so they get a little bit of grit, because it helps grind things up. So bit of bedding, bit of the food, and then a little bit of soil to go with it.
So they take in water, but they don't drink it.
Yes, that's a very good way of saying it. Absolutely. Yeah, they do need it, but they're not drinking it just like we do. Correct.
Great question, Nicole and Mark. Miss Alex's class says, how many worms are usually used in a compost box? So that's from Brianna.
Okay, that's a really good question also. Now, it does depend on the kind you're using, and it can depend also on how much you're actually putting in the bin food-wise as well. There are places that are experts now. When I started, there was hardly anybody in this business, but now when I looked online, there are so many businesses, so many people that are either selling the bins with the worms and the bedding, or just the worms, and they've got all this great information. So I'd say it depends on the size of bin you get, because that really dictates the size of bin, how much bedding, and then how much food you can put in. but I'm going to use my hands to show you visually. When I had my blue box type of worm bin, so you can visualize a blue box, I had the worms were basically like a very, very, very large handful of worms. So I don't know what that represents in weight, but if you want weights, I suggest you go online. There's a lot of great sites that talk exactly about how many worms you need for this size bin or this size bin. And they're there to handhold you and help you with all of that information. But it's a really, really good question.
Yeah, awesome. This next one's a tricky one. I Googled it just because I wanted to know how many different species of worms are there that are native to Canada. Do you know the answer to this one?
Well, actually, there's none. Okay, depends on how you look at it, but there's typically none that are native to Canada. It's been said that all the worms that are here have been introduced. Now, again, when you say native, how far back do you go? I go back thousands of years. If you go back millennia, I mean, so yeah, none of them are typically considered native, which is interesting, right? Because a lot of our worms we say are good for the garden. It helps break down material, and that's true. But again, certain kind of species of worms, if they get into the wrong habitat, they can actually be problematic and destructive as well. And there's even an invasive worm right now that is very problematic in our woodlands. So very interesting question. Good thought.
That kind of actually leads us into the next question, because Ford School says that they have a red wiggler compost bin in their kindergarten class. But do you have any recommendations on how to separate the soil from the worms so that they're not introducing worms out into their ecosystem when they use their compost?
Okay. Yeah, so what I always did is I would harvest the soil amendment from the worms, and then I'd have the new bedding and more food ready to start all over again. So it'd be a continuous cycle. So I would never stop and get rid of the worms. If I ever had to stop and get rid of the worms, which I think I must have done at one point, but I'm not sure what I did so long ago, I would find someone who wanted them to continue it on, or you could find a supplier who's selling it to see if they would like them. I would try to find a new home for them if you're going to stop. But if you're not, just keep going, just keep harvesting. Again, if you use the layer approach, that seems like a really cool one. I saw one, I think it's an Ottawa area company. It's not as big as a picture I showed. It's more of one that can sit on your counter, and they actually used wood for theirs. So it's much smaller, but they still had the layers. So they still had the idea where when you've got your worm castings ready to harvest, now you entice them up to the next layer. There's like a mesh screen where they can go up. It's fresh bedding, fresh food. So then you can simply lift it off, take that bin of worm castings, and then dump it out into a bin or into your garden or however, and then you can just keep going, keep going, keep going. Depends how you do it. I did it the hard way with the bin, where I used the sunlight and I got the pile and then they went right to the bottom. You know, if you don't mind doing that, great. It was actually quite fine once I got used to it. So it's all possible.
Good. A nice sunny day to be outside to play with your compost soil.
There you go.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too bad.
Awesome. And then have shade ready. So as soon as you are done and you're down to your pile, then you can easily quickly get them in the shade. So yeah.
Yep. Oh, and then there was an extra one in here as well from Ford School. They were asking, does composting help animals? So we talked a little bit about plants. Does it help animals at all?
That's a really good question. I think everything is ultimately connected. So if compost is going to help a plant and that plant to be strong, and then you've got an animal eating the plant, just like us, I think that helps them that way. There are lots of insects that will eat plants. And I know we think it's a problem, but quite frankly, only some insects eat plants to the point where it's a really big problem. Most of them are actually just quietly eating. We don't even notice a lot of the quote unquote damage they're doing. And it's really important. There's like a leaf cutter bee, which will come and take some of the leaves and cut it out and use it to line their nest. And a lot of caterpillars use the leaves, which they have to have as food, and then their food for birds. So all these animals in turn are getting the right nutrients that nature intended. So good question.
Everything is interconnected. Yep.
Absolutely. And every choice we make has the ability to help. So that's another wonderful thing about this.
Yeah, awesome. This next one we have from a couple of different people. So Michelle Smith and Ford School as well were wondering, how long can worms live? That's
a really good question. I don't know the answer because, again, it's different species.
Right.
With the red wrigglers that I had, I never noticed dead worms, and I had them for a long time. So I'd have to look that up to see. I know that it's only a matter of, I think, weeks before they're mature enough to reproduce and have eggs of their own, and then they keep reproducing. I'm not sure how many months a worm actually lives, to be honest.
I typed it in Google as you were talking. It says they can live as long as 4 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they will die and decompose in the bin and keep reproducing. So
that's what I wondered. Like, would I notice them if they had? I don't know. So interesting.
Yeah, 4 years. That's an old worm. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I learned something new too.
Yeah. So we have a question here from Mrs. T's class. If no worms are native to Canada, what broke down all the leaves and stuff before the worms got here?
That's a really good question. Again, there's other organisms that are players in this. So there are all different creatures, microorganisms, as well as smaller creatures we can see that are invertebrates that are constantly helping, eating up a lot of this food and contributing. So worms are great, but they're not the be all and end all. There's more to it than that.
Right, like we talked about in the trivia, there's so many tiny, tiny living things inside the soil that we can't even see as humans that are all working all the time.
And there's still so much to discover about this as well.
Yeah, totally. What was the next one? Oh, and another one from them as well. How do worms eat if they don't have a mouth? Do worms have a mouth?
It's a very good question. I believe they do have a mouth. I just don't know that it's one that we can actually recognize similar to our face. So they have different parts to their body that we would recognize for ingesting the food, digesting the food, reproducing, and then excreting or pooping out the food. But it's just very different looking to ours.
Yes. Yeah, their digestive system might be a little bit different than a human's, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was my next one here? Sorry. Oh, this one from D. Mitasinka. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. Does composting help us or the worms more? I don't even know if that's a question you can answer.
Yes, I don't know, because when you think about vermicomposting, it definitely helps the worms a lot, but we're benefiting too. And I guess it depends on how much you use it to how much benefit you get from it directly. But you're also, again, helping yourself and the community and the world at large by diverting that from the landfill. So I'm not sure, as you say, we can even evaluate that.
Yeah, helping both of us a lot, I think.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay,
we have a couple. Sorry, go ahead.
In a win-win situation, we're all so interconnected. We need each other.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, the more we use it, the more plants we get, the more food for the worms. It's like forever the cycle. A couple great questions from Michelle Smith. Does the length of the worm matter for how much it can decompose? And are there other insects that you could add to a worm bin to help with decomposition?
I wouldn't purposely add anything else to a worm bin. I think just let that be. However, I have heard of people having sometimes seen springtails in their bin. I don't know how they get there, but they actually are meant to be a part of a regular ecosystem in a compost pile, and they don't cause problems. You don't want to have like fruit flies coming. They can be a problem. I know I'm getting off topic a little bit. So when you do put the food in, I should say also cover it with enough soil that you're not going to attract fruit flies in the summer. And that's one thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I wouldn't add anything on purpose. There was another question in there, though, I think at the beginning.
And does the length of the worm have to do with how much it can decompose? Do we want to get rid of long worms?
Well, I think there is a correlation, because it can kind of eat, I think, what is it, their body weight a day?
Oh, wow.
It's something like their body weight or half their body weight each day. Like, it was a significant amount. And so therefore their body weight and their length would then have a relation to that. Yeah.
So bigger worms are better. Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left, guys. I know we will try to finish up at about 45 minutes after the hour. So your last chance to pop in any questions before we do our wrap-ups. Also, if there is any students that finished up their picture and would like to present it on camera, if you could give me a wave or use your little reaction, it would be lovely to see if anybody finished up any of their pictures and would like to show them to us. Ford School, yeah, I see that you guys do have a few students that are here. Yeah, so would you guys be wanting to share some of yours? Let me see if I can I'll put this guy up here. Are you guys able to unmute, or are we only able to see the pictures? It looks like we only get to see them. That's okay. So I see we've got some trees. These ones are very intricate.
Wow, yeah. Look at that. Wonderful.
They did an apple too. A nice little apple tree.
Oh,
This one looks like, I'd say, a watermelon maybe.
oh, super. Oh, look at that.
While these guys are presenting all of theirs too, I see we have another question coming up. How can we stop seeds from germinating in a compost bin?
Okay. These are fantastic, these pictures. I'm loving them.
This is like a really intricate palm tree.
Yeah.
Well, I see one from Logan here with some color.
Yeah. There's a couple there with color. So yeah, if you don't want seeds to germinate, then you're looking at an outside pile, like the basic composting kind, because you want that to heat up, and that usually makes enough heat. Oh, lovely. I can see them bigger now.
Yeah, there you go. Sorry, I could have done this earlier. Now I feel bad.
Oh, they're lovely.
Some of us are very good at drawing flowers.
Nice. Yeah, so if you want to stop the seeds from germinating, you want a regular type of composter where it creates enough heat. Oh, lovely. And then again, that heat will stop a lot of those seeds. If you have invasive plant seeds that are really a concern, you don't want to take a chance. They really should go in the garbage. Beautiful. But typical weed seeds in a typical compost pile, if it's big enough and it gets hot enough, then it can usually take care of them. Wow.
So your compost will automatically produce that heat as you add material to it.
Yeah, it should do. If you're giving if you're giving the organisms the right balance of the wet and the dry materials so they can thrive, then they should be able to make enough heat if the pile is big enough as well. Wow.
This one, remember to include the sunshine to help the plants grow. That's great. Yeah, so that's a great question. So yeah, remove any seeds that you know are going to be problematic, but generally it hopefully shouldn't be an issue. I know I've noticed before when I leave my compost sitting for too long and forget about it, then that's when I start to see things growing in it. As long as I'm working it lots, it usually doesn't seem to be much of an issue.
Now, if you also have an area where you've got what's called master gardeners, oh nice, in your area, there are these expert gardeners. They've taken courses and they're there. Beautiful. Oh. They're there to help the community. So if you've got questions, you can ask your local master gardener. Oh, nice.
These are so, wow, we have great artists in our event today.
Oh, fantastic.
It's like a little pumpkin. Like, how did they get time to fill in all of these great pictures? These are incredible.
Oh, lovely. And they're smiling. Nice.
I think we just got our last couple here from you guys at Fort School. Very nice.
Oh, great.
Awesome. Man, you guys have got a lot going on here. What else do we got? Oh, what a beautiful little cycle. That's perfect.
Cool.
Cute little cherries. Awesome. Wow. Thank you very much for sharing all of those, guys. Those were awesome to see. Do I have any other schools that are hoping to share some of their posters before we do our final wrap up? We do have a couple more minutes. I think Mrs. T's class, do you guys have someone that wanted to share? Okay, let me just see. I can maybe see if I can get yours up here.
Oh, great. You can see bigger. Nice. Very nice.
Go. Yeah, that looks awesome. Great job. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left. I don't see any last minute questions popping up into the chat. I'll show, oh, we've got a couple more here that we wanted to show. Oh, we got a worm and an apple. Look at this little worm piece. Very cute. Awesome. Yeah, those are great. Okay, so there were a couple things that I did want to share with you guys before I let you go and before I do my final thank yous to you, Sarah, because this has been wonderful. But I did just want to share this with everyone. So if you have your phone, you can just scan this QR code and it will bring you right to our form to sign up for this. If not, I will just pop the link right in the chat here. You can click on that as well. But if you liked this event and you're interested in doing the last in the series of events, our final event with the CWF in this series is going to be on school gardens. So helping you start a school garden, getting you to share your school gardens. The great thing about this event is if you sign up, you can actually sign up to receive a free seed package to plant in your classroom. So if you sign up, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and forward your information to CWF, and they will reach out to you to get your mailing address and get these seeds so we can hopefully get them planted before the summertime. So there's one more event lined up with these guys, and it's on school gardens. If you have not already signed up, please do. If you have already signed up, we will contact you about the seeds, so don't worry, you're not going to miss out on them. I would like to say a huge thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more sharing today, but I did want to say a huge thank you to Sarah from the CWF. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you to all the schools that asked so many awesome questions and were able to share what they learned. I already learned so much today, and I already love composting, so I hope that you guys learned a lot as well. And thank you, Sarah, for joining us.
Oh, it was my great pleasure. What a great bunch of people you all are sharing like this. Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, well, we only have 2 minutes left until we really got to get going. So with that, I will say thank you to everyone and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Bye, Mrs. T's class. Thanks for the wave. Bye, guys. Bye-bye. Oh, look.